Just type it.
All right, welcome everyone. This is our second annual, what is becoming an annual tradition for us, Cyber Risk Wednesday that we do as close as possible following DEF CON, which is very painful for a lot of us, as I'm sure it is for you if you were out there in Vegas in the desert burning with us. I'm very happy to see so many people in the room, and I know that there's a lot more following us online, either on the internet, via Twitter, or on C-SPAN. My name is Bo Woods. I'm the Deputy Director of the Cyber Statecraft Initiative here at the Atlantic Council. I'd like to welcome you all to today's event, hosted by the Cyber Statecraft Initiative, which is housed within the Council's Brent Scowcroft Center on International Security. I'd also like to welcome those who are following on the webcast, and I encourage you to join the conversation with the Twitter hashtag ACCyber or ACCowcroft. This afternoon's event, DEF CON to DC, we hope will provide a layer of translation for policymakers to understand the significance, urgency, and response options to the flood of technical information coming from last week's hacker conferences that took place in Las Vegas. That is DEF CON, Black Hat, and B-Sides Las Vegas, as well as a handful of mini conferences that happened within conferences and on the sidelines of others. I'm very pleased to be joined by a distinguished group of my colleagues and friends. First of all, we have Chris Thomas, aka Space Rogue. I still can't call him Chris with a straight face. He's currently working at IBM X-Force Red. He's also the founder of the first cybersecurity research think tank, Loft Heavy Industries, as well as popular Hacker News Network video news show. Nick Leiserson is the legislative director for Congressman Jim Langevin, who's the co-founder of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, one of two Congress members that we know who joined us out in DEF CON last week. Jessica Wilkerson is a professional staff member for the House Energy and Commerce Committee, where she focuses on cybersecurity legislation. She also joined us last week. Lastly, our moderator for today's event, Ariel Robinson, is a freelance writer and analyst who specializes in defense, security, and technology policy. She hosts a podcast called The Tech Effect, which focuses on big picture ramifications of technology for society. I very much look forward to this panel discussion, but before we kick it off, we've got a short video that, or a short presentation that I hope is going to convey some of the excitement and intensity of last week's hacker conferences viscerally to the audience. I call it 40 slides in 60 seconds, and you can time me. I might hit it, but I might not. All right, are you ready? Let's go. We had Wonder Woman. We had a 2-day cyber safety track. We had hula hoops. We had panels. We had feds on panels. We had Congress on panels. We had Congress on panels with 2,000 hackers cheering them. We had shots with Congress on panels. We filled a village 5 times expected capacity. We had a healthy, balanced diet. We had some serious conversations. We had some tinfoil hats. We had badges, badge life. We had black badges, platinum ringed, 24 karat gold. We had hostile networks. We had tiki gods made in our image. We had 25,000 hackers in a hallway. We had some issues, but not as many as you'd think. We hacked biology. We hacked cars. We hacked cars and took home trucks. We hacked medical devices. We found unhackable medical devices like this one from the 1870s. We hacked voting computers. We hacked more voting computers. We hacked all the voting computers. We hacked all the things. We sign interpreted all the things. We hacked the planet. We did something historic. We did have fun. We will do it again next year. No, DEF CON is not canceled. So now I want to play a video. Oh, thank you, Gary. That was an immense challenge. I look forward to hearing how well I did on the speed round. We've got a short video that is from a Facebook Live that Congressman Hurd and Congressman Langevin did in the voting village. So let me just play that for you right now, and then we'll get started with the panel. All right, that concludes the video. I think that was a good, quick segment to help transition us into the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to invite my panelists to come up. All right, Ariel.
All right, hey guys. First, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for coming. It's an honor to be part of this panel and with such amazing folks. First, we actually had, as Bo mentioned, we had 3 conferences all in the last, 10 days. Yeah. We had DEF CON, which you saw photos from. We also had Black Hat, and we had B-Sides Las Vegas. Could you explain a little bit about the differences between each of these different conferences, sort of who they're geared towards, who goes to them, who puts them on, and so on?
I'll start.
Black Hat, well, the first conference that initially started 25 years ago was DEF CON, and it was basically a gathering in Vegas of a bunch of hackers who wanted to hang out and have fun and see each other in person. From that, 21 years ago now, I think, the Black Hat arose, which is the commercial or vendor-sponsored event that does a lot of training and mostly training as well as a vendor area, but it's very commercial space. You have a lot of the security companies there exhibiting their wares with an expo floor, et cetera. And then there's B-Sides. And B-Sides grew out of talks that were rejected from Black Hat. And people thought they were still really good talks and they wanted to still see those talks. And so they created a third conference, all within the same time span, called B-Sides. That has sort of grown into a hacker-centric conference with a lot of different tracks and talks for a lot of new people. A lot of new people go there because of the tracks that they offer at B-Sides. I don't know if you can add to that, Bo.
Yeah. The idea of B-Sides is it would be like the B side of a record for those who are old enough to remember, like records that you had to flip. It's terrible for trying to play in your car. The B-Sides, I kind of refer to that as almost like a hacker family reunion, because it's a lot of the people who their companies pay for them to go to Black Hat, but they skip out on some of the things at Black Hat and come over to B-Sides and hang out with their friends that they may only see once a year. DEF CON is huge, 25,000 people. It's hard to meet and really run into anybody that you know, or at least with any regularity. And then Black Hat, like you said, is very vendor-focused, very industry-focused. So a lot of people go to Black Hat to look for their next job in the C-suite, whereas at B-Sides, we have like an entire track that's dedicated to helping people find their first job in information security.
What all was everyone's role at these conferences? So for myself, I was registered as press at Black Hat, and I was an attendee at B-Sides, and then I ducked in and out of DEF CON very briefly right before I went to the airport, because 4 or 5 days in Las Vegas was totally enough for me. What about you all? What were you doing those 8 days?
So I only arrived on Friday night of DEF CON, and I had a talk with some other feds, a friendly feds, meet the feds talk that I did on Saturday night as one of DEF CON's evening lounges. So it's 2 hours designed to be very interactive and give folks in the security research community a chance to talk to some friendly feds. They do exist. I was also, you noticed, my boss was at DEF CON as well, thanks to the Atlantic Council. He got to go out and spend some time with Congressman Hurd, so I kind of got to tag along with them as well. He got to see a tour of most of the villages, and it was my first experience at DEF CON. I had a terrific time. Would love to go again.
So for Black Hat, I was there as part of the company I work for, IBM X-Force Red, and so I had to do some time in the booth. I did a lot of meetings with press. I did a lot of meetings with other companies. Because of the fact that everybody in the industry is in one location at one time, it's a perfect opportunity to meet other people in other companies, or press is there and wants to do interviews. So that took up the first 3 days or so during Black Hat. I was able to sneak away a little bit and get over to B-Sides. I volunteer on the CFP committee for B-Sides, which basically means I help select which talks are going to be presented at the conference. And so I was...
What does CFP stand for?
Call for papers.
I'm going to call out all the acronyms, by the way.
I apologize. I should have known better.
Don't worry about it.
So I'm on the committee that helps select, or goes through all the paper submissions to select which talks are going to be presented, and so I was able to get a staff badge at B-Sides, so I spent a little bit of time at B-Sides saying hello to folks, but I couldn't spend a lot of time there. I had to get back to Black Hat, and then on Friday and Saturday, I assisted Nick here with assisting his boss, Representative Hurd and Lagavin, around the show floor as we visited some of the different villages at DEF CON. So that was pretty much my 8-day experience, and as you said, 4 days is too long. I was way there double that, which is too much.
So I was only there for B-Sides, and I was there to talk about my committee's interaction with the security research community and how we've worked with them over the last couple of years, what we're working on, how we leverage folks like Bo and the Atlanta Council to bridge the gap between the security community and the policy world, because that gap sometimes seems unbridgeable, and it's not, so we try and do everything we can to demonstrate that. Yeah, had a great time at B-Sides, but I wasn't at DEF CON or Black Hat.
Yeah, with the help of some of my Atlanta Council colleagues and also I Am the Cavalry, we ran a 2-day track at B-Sides, which Jessica was at, which included like a mock congressional hearing, which was really fun. We did a cyber crisis exercise with both policymakers and hackers to get them to empathize with one another and build some understanding and education awareness. Also arranged for Herd and Langevin to come out to DEF CON, and we took them through like a 1-day crash course. We started off with doing like hacker speed dating, or find your hacker spirit animal, we called it. The idea was we wanted to match the Congress people up and the policy people up with some of the hackers and find a good personality fit. We did the tour that Nick alluded to, took them around to a lot of the interactive exhibits and workshops and villages that we did. I did a talk on Saturday night called Do No Harm, which is the one that you saw that we showed up half an hour early for the room and found that it was supposed to hold 40, and we had 100 people in line with half an hour to go. So we were able to get in touch with the organizers. They gave us a room for 200, and we had a line out the door for that, which was really good to have some validation. Helped put together a medical device hacking village for the first time out at DEF CON in conjunction with Biohacking Village and IoT Village. And I was also one of the contest and events goons. The goon is the term for the people who help run and put on the DEF CON conference. I didn't make it over to Black Hat, but I had a full schedule anyways.
Yeah. I spent a lot of quality time running between hotels. It was a lot. So speaking of these different villages and grounds, sort of the B-Sides Las Vegas term for the different tracks is a ground. So there was the Common Ground and Ground Truth. We had the SE Village, the Social Engineering Village. We had Recon Village. We had the IoT Village. Could you describe a little bit about what all goes on there at these different?
Well,
I saw some pictures, but what is that?
I guess you could consider these like birds of a feather meetups. So at the Vehicle Hacking Village, they actually had a couple of vehicles in place, and people were allowed to play with them, if you will, hack them. Same thing with the Voting Machine Village. They had a bunch of voting machines set up that people could experiment with. Biohacking Village, etc. There's the Lockpick Village. There's the ICS Village. There's
Industrial Control Systems.
Thank you. There was the Roots Kids Asylum, which is there for kids to learn and play around with different things. So it's just a wide variety of different activities that people can experiment with or play with if they're interested in. They can go visit people that are knowledgeable on the subject and actually get some hands-on experience with different things. So it's all-encompassing under the big term hacking. So, right. I don't know if you want to add, Bo.
Where most conferences you'll find it's all about the content, all about the tracks. I didn't count, but I think there were about 12 to 15 tracks over the course of that 8 days that went on in parallel with each other, and it was pretty intense. So the hacking conferences are some of the only ones that I know of where people go to say that they didn't go see any talks, because they spend most of their time out in the villages, in the contests, talking with their friends, meeting up, having lunch, going to parties. It's really an all-encompassing set of events for 3 different stakeholder types. The kind of the community with B-Sides Las Vegas, the corporates with Black Hat, and then the more kind of hacker community with DEF CON. And so you'll have lots of people who just spend all weekend in a room trying to do the capture the flag, to basically do red team, blue team penetration testing almost, They spend their whole weekend doing that, or running through a contest for the crypto and privacy village, trying to break cryptography in real time, or going and exploring social engineering issues. The social engineering village is always a really popular one. That's the idea that you can kind of talk your way to getting any information out of anyone, or
It's
getting
my
past
specialty.
any guards. What's that?
It's my specialty.
It's your specialty, that's right. As a journalist, you are a top-notch social engineer. So it's really, there's a heavy focus out there on education, awareness, building new skills, building new capacities. And I think this year more than ever, we tried overtly in some of the content that we curated to make it about building policy skills that were compatible with public policy issues, that were compatible with DC, that allowed some of the hackers to become more civically minded and to realize that DC actually wants them to participate, unlike a few years ago when it was more of an active, well, not quite hostility. Right, yeah. Now things have changed. And so we're trying to build capacity as well as awareness that that's the situation.
So one of those, I think we'll come back to sort of evolving relationships of these different stakeholder groups. What else was different about DEF CON this year, and what happened? What did you expect, and what did you not expect? This also for our congressional staff members here. I think it was both of your first times as well, correct? It was my first time as well. Las Vegas, crazy place.
So one thing that I think was different, I can say, having never been before, was that there were congressmen there speaking on panels, both on Saturday afternoon and then on the 101 main track to 2,000 people on Sunday. To the best of our knowledge, that has not happened before. So that was new, and I think that was great. In terms of what was different about it for me than what I expected, I've spoken at ShmooCon, Washington, D.C.'s local HackerCon, a couple of times, and tried to use that as a venue to help the security research community get an understanding that there are people in Congress that are interested in making sure that they have a seat at the table and that we have a lot to learn from hackers. But ShmooCon is, DC's hacker convention, so I thought, well, of course they might have some predilection to policy that might not carry into a conference that is known for having the spot the Fed game. And that was, I came in expecting a little bit of resistance. I wanted to be an ambassador. I wanted to, at every single person I met, I made a point to say, hi, I'm from Congress, and I need your help. And I expected to get a lot of, at best, neutral and some negative reactions, and that really wasn't the case at all. I mean, I think a lot of people were surprised to see me there, but also very interested in engaging and very happy to, feeling like, they wanted an outlet for trying to make sure that the voice of the hacking community was heard, and that they were very receptive to the fact that I was willing to come out into the 105-degree heat of Vegas to talk to them. And I very much appreciated that myself personally, to feel like there was no barrier, that I was welcomed right away at my first DEF CON. Some people have been going for
Too long.
Too long.
It's an interesting point you brought up, and it's one I think I talked about up here last year, is that there's a slow thawing of relations, if you will, between the government and the hacker community, and it's a good thing. The hackers want to work with government want to work with the hackers. We're seeing bug bounty programs in government. We're seeing a lot more outreach from the hacker community to attempt to contact their elected officials. And I think the fact that Representative Herb and Langevin were at DEF CON further illustrates that point. And it was really interesting to walk around the floor with them, because it was like a gaggle of like 15, 20 people with the congressman in the middle, and we're all kind of like just kind of walking around. The conference at the Darius Village And people I knew would come up to me and says, what's going on? Who are these people? And I'm like, oh, these are the congressmen. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Wow. And it was really interesting to see that reaction from folks. It was way more positive than I was expecting. And it's sort of, that's the big surprising thing for me as to how engaged people want to be in this community. And we realize that if we don't step forward and say something and make our voices known, things are going to be done without our input. And I think we want to make sure that we have that input into that process. So.
Yeah, so just a quick side note, because I can't help laughing. I have this thing at my committee where every time somebody tries to put the word hack or hacker into a press release or a report, I immediately replace it with research or researcher.
Thank you.
but I'm laughing because apparently, like, that might not be a totally bad thing. Maybe people would prefer we say hacker. Okay, that's good, because generally I'll keep on my researcher crusade. No, I think that I would echo everything that both Nick and Chris said. I think it was amazing how accepted we were, not just accepted. I mean, people were so excited that we were there. People would find out that I was from Congress and be like, "Oh my God, that's so cool!" And you know, we just take off from there. But I think the thing that I found surprising, and I think this shows, you know, I think of DC as this bubble that lives inside the Beltway, and you have to get out of the DC bubble to really understand how the rest of the world is working. So from my perspective, and some of this might be because I work very closely with Bo and with Josh Corman, the Statecraft's director, but, you know, folks kept asking me, well, how do I get involved? How do I get involved? Who do I talk to? What do I do? And I think it was actually surprising to me, because in my mind I was like, well, you're obviously already involved, because we're here and we're talking to you and we seek your input. And so I think it was striking to me that I think, at least from my perspective and my community's perspective, I don't know if we've done a good enough job of advertising. Like, you don't need to be part of any special group. It's helpful for us with I Am the Cavalry to kind of use I Am the Cavalry as a centralized point that we can go to and say, hey, we need to talk to somebody who knows about vehicles, or we need to talk to somebody who knows about medical devices, and specifically we need people who can hack them. But, you know, to say to people, you can reach out directly to us. You can email me directly. You can call the committee's main line and have them connect you to me. I am perfectly willing, and actually I would love to talk to you. So I guess in my mind, and what I discovered there was a little bit of a disconnect between folks thinking that there was some kind of special permission or pass needed in order to talk to Congress, whereas in my mind I'm like, I get so many phone calls every day, like, join in the queue.
So you mentioned I Am the Cavalry, and I think one of the things that was different this year, correct me if I'm wrong, Bo, was that the Cavalry had its own track at B-Sides Las Vegas, right?
Yeah, we've had, so I Am the Cavalry is a global grassroots initiative that Josh Corman started about almost exactly 4 years ago.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's something I've been really heavily involved with, and it's actually led to Josh and I joining the Atlanta Council because we found that we were badly needed in DC, and we wanted to have a DC platform and a DC outlet for some of that. And we had a track. This is our third year. Yeah, our third year with the track. And it's grown every single year, and it's been pretty amazing to just see what has grown along with it. This year was much more overtly focused on public policy things. One of the things that surprised me, like everybody else, was the degree to which the hackers and the security researchers were not just tolerating people from DC, but actively engaging them. And Jessica, I knew you would be okay at B-Sides when we talked about that. The one I was really worried about is DEF CON. And you know, don't tell your boss, but I was a little bit afraid for making sure that they got through safely. So we did a lot of prep. We laid a lot of groundwork. We had people on security staff who were there to be able to take care of anything. We had people in the room for some of the Q&As to just make sure that things went pretty smoothly. And by and large, I mean, it was really, really frictionless. We actually had trouble leaving some of the areas because so many people wanted to ask positive questions or say thank you to the congressman. And I thought it was a huge relief in my mind. But also, I think it shows the turnover in the security researcher community. This year, as every year, the conference grew by about 20%. And I think that it actually grew more than that because I think a lot of the older people have started not going to DEF CON and some of the other events because they've got families, they're not as technical, they want to get home. 4 days is too many for them in Vegas. And so I think we're actually replacing some of the old guard who are really still have a lot of the battle scars from going and talking to Congress, talking to agencies, getting cease and desist orders, being threatened with arrest. A lot of those folks have kind of aged out of the community, and we've got a large crop of people for whom this is their first, second, third, or fourth year in the security research community, and they're very eager to engage. One of the things that actually the keynote speaker at the B-Sides I Am the Cavalry track said to me one time is Karen Elazari, and she did a TED Talk, and she said when she got off stage at the TED Talk, she met a lot of people who were really positive. And she realized at that point that we have permission to engage more broadly in society. We just haven't given ourselves as the community and our individual selves permission to engage. And that's what we need to do to unlock it. So I think this year was an inflection point that helped to unlock some of the people who go to those types of events to engage more broadly in public policy and other discussions outside of that echo chamber.
A far cry from not that many years ago when feds were actually uninvited from DEF CON.
They were, for reasons that we won't talk about.
Yes, we can move on from that.
Google it.
Yeah, Google it. So some of this, and actually part of the reason that feds were uninvited was about trust. Trust across the technology ecosystem is critical and ever evolving. How has trust between the research community and the feds, between T-shirts and suits, be they feds or industry executives, how have these different relationships changed? What do you think has driven that change?
That's a tough question.
Go.
I mean, I think one of the realizations that I had was when the Sony hack happened and President Obama got on TV and said, look, we need to take care of this. And it felt almost like a call for the adults in the room. And as Space knows, the original call for I Am the Cavalry was we realized that some of the people at the top weren't going to come in at the last minute and save us, and we knew that we had to be the adults in the room. And I think there was a feeling in a lot of the security research community that that was the case when that happened. We also saw a lot greater activity in public policy space, looking at cyber policy. And what I realized is right along the lines of what Space said earlier, which is that if we don't engage positively and proactively, other people will fill the void. And they will fill it as maybe lesser qualified people, potentially lesser motives, and with a lesser capacity. So we had to really step up, and we had to become ambassadors. We had to build a bridge from one side and connect with people like Nick and Jessica from the other side, building a bridge to establish some kind of firm trust between each other, even if it's just a very, very small trust bridge. And then once that's established, we can use it to build that bridge out more.
If we look at historically at some of the initiatives that have gone through Congress over the last 30 years, rules like the Child Online Protection Act, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, these are all laws that have been passed that kind of turns hackers into criminals. And so there's been a large distrust of lawmakers from the hacker side. And I think what we're starting to see is there is a thaw of that. There's the trust level is starting to, on both sides, is starting to thaw. We're starting to see, as evidenced by, we've had Meet the Fed panels at DEF CON and other conferences for years. And there's usually, you get a couple of lawmakers up on stage, and then there's some people in the audience. But the number of people in the audience that are interested in that sort of thing has grown dramatically, as evidenced this year by having standing room only twice, even though you got a bigger room. So, and I think Hurd and Lagavulin had 2,000 people in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just huge. So we're seeing a greater interest and a greater trust level on both sides of the equation now, despite the historical baggage that has come with it.
Yeah, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is on the Fed side, at least the congressional side. As you see more interest, there's more of a realization that we need to talk to some of the experts, and it's very self-interested. It's like, if I want to talk to the people who know what they're talking about election hacking, then some of them are the people that are organizing the Village, right? Or cars, or whatever, take your pick. And you can see that as well in positive policy outcomes that have come from engaging with the security research community, whether that's in reviewing what the United States' position is on the Boston R arrangement with respect to intrusion software controls, whether it's realizing the potential of vulnerability disclosure programs within the federal government, whether it's through bug bounty or just having a program in the first place. So that's Congress is self-motivated. The self-interest is driving the need to be like, okay, we need to build some trust with the security research community because they have so much to offer us. We need their help. And part of the way that we can do that is by trying to be honest brokers with them and explaining, what we're doing in Congress, and saying the door's open. If we're doing something right, we want to hear about it. If we're doing something wrong, we want to hear about it. And if there are challenges that Congress is not addressing right now, we definitely want to hear about that.
Yeah, and actually at our B-Sides track, Travis Moore from TechCongress.io was there. And Tech Congress is a group that's trying to get more tech-savvy people and give them a year-long fellowship in Congress. And I think they did a survey of congressional offices and found that there were, 4 people who had a computer science background out of 14,000, something like that, which is a pretty small number. And actually, I think what they found...
2 of them are here.
Yeah, 2 of them are here. And I think they found that there were actually 4 members of Congress who had a computer science or tech background out of 400 and something, however many 435 Congress members. So it's actually a higher density of Congress members with a tech background than staffers. And when the staffers are the ones who are working through and informing some of these positions, that's not enough. And one last point. I don't always agree with things that John McAfee says. In fact, I usually don't. Some people know who John McAfee is. He's a crazy guy who helped start the security industry, the cybersecurity industry. But he said something like, with the amount of dependence on connected technology that we have today, it's no longer acceptable for Congress to just have a staffer for that. They have to have a little bit more than just a staffer who that's a part-time job, right? I think that's absolutely accurate, and I think doing more to drive more technical literacy into public policy is much needed.
Okay, so as someone with a completely non-related background who got into this actually about a year ago when I was watching this very panel online. Yeah, it's been a steep learning curve. Let's talk about the types of backgrounds that really are required to be in this world. Let's talk about the relationships between graybeards and noobs, nothing personal. Josh Corman gave an excellent talk, one of the keynotes at B-Sides, about the need for the hacker community to move on from elites, which is written with an L and 2 3s and a 7. And it wasn't until his talk, after seeing it for a few weeks, it wasn't until his talk when he turned it into elitism and added that pigeon of what I call normal, that I figured out what L337 actually meant.
Yeah.
How
Speak.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'm okay, but how is that relationship evolving, and what role do you think the technical community, how can the technical and non-technical communities work together more efficiently?
One of the things that we've been trying to do is lead with empathy. So start by listening, by understanding, by getting to know the concerns of whether it's the public policy community, whether it's industry, whether it's insurers or patients or hospitals or whoever it is that we're trying to reach. You have to really lead with empathy, and you have to start that way, because if you don't, then nothing else will work. I think that's a skill that we certainly have a lack of in the cybersecurity research community. We got into this, a lot of us, because we didn't like people. We would rather spend time with these machines, which are logical and simple, and we can pull them apart and figure out how they work. People aren't like that.
That's okay. That's why I give talks on soft skills and security.
That's right. So we have to build those soft skills a little bit more, and we have to also find teammates like Nick and Jessica and a lot of other people who are already in the locations that we want to be, like public policy, and we have to team up with them to, I've said it before, I'll say it again, be ambassadors. So go into foreign lands, unexplored, learn the language, learn the lingo, deal with hostile natives on both sides, live to tell the tales, and then go establish those trust and trading relationships back and forth. Go learn the language, write a translation book for our own communities, and help build that out. I think that's the only way that a lot of this nascent work has really paid off.
Nick, Jessica, what have you, as the bridge to your respective offices and committees, how have you approached this translation issue, bringing it back as the technical folks?
So I think what I realized pretty early on working with very technical folks was that I didn't need to be a technical expert and they didn't need to be a policy expert, because we could essentially meet in the middle. They could give me the lay of the land, the map of the technical realities. This is what the technology will permit, this is what it will not permit. And then from there, I could combine that with the political realities and the policy goals and the policy objectives, and then between the two of us, or however many of us were there, we could arrive at a technically sound, politically feasible solution. And so I think that was kind of the biggest part, is just accepting, you know, I don't need to be the technical expert in the room. I can just say, I know what you're saying because I have a technical background, but we're way past, I've stopped being able to follow you, but it doesn't matter. You tell me this and I believe you. And then having, you know, the person on the other end of that conversation say, I don't understand why you can't just pass a law that does this, or why you can't just regulate everything ever in the world. But you're telling me that you can't, and I believe you. And then between the two of us, we kind of arrive at a feasible.
So you mentioned, you know, the backgrounds, and I think that at least in my experience, you do need people with as many different backgrounds as you can imagine to be effective in cybersecurity writ large, right? It can't just be technical people, it can't just be policy people. You need lawyers, you need psychologists, you need economists, you need lots of folks. I think the problem is absolutely.
You need linguists.
The problem tends to be that we're not spreading them around very much. The tech folks are concentrated in tech companies, and the policy folks are concentrated in the Hill. And when I go back to my university and I talk to the computer science classes and I say, look, come work on the Hill. We would love to have you. We need more people like you. I think the flip is also true. I think that tech in general would be wise to invest in some more policy people, and I think that would help a lot to, again, kind of help bridge the divide, as Jessica talks about, in terms of, you know, where you're coming from. And I mean, I think also you can see that in terms of research too. I think it'd be great to see more social behavioral economics, in particular research at DEF CON. There's some, but a lot of it tends to focus on the tech. And that's, if you're looking at cybersecurity as a policy challenge or just as a challenge in the world, right? Tech is absolutely a big part of it. This wouldn't exist without the tech. But there's a lot of other interesting aspects to the problem that I think deserve exploring as well.
I need to jump on that because this is such an important part of a lot of the conversations that I have with technical folks when we're trying to talk about policy. I don't know who came up with it. I don't know what the original saying is, but you can't patch the human element. And so credit to whoever said that first. But you know, I think there's sometimes when you get really technical people, their solution is, well, you know, just have 5 forms of authentication before you can log into your email. Like, you need a retinal scan and fingerprints, and it just doesn't actually connect with what a real person, like my grandmother, is not going to do that. And I think, you know, part of the role of policy people in the technical world is to say, your first primary threat model needs to be somebody's grandmother, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, depending on the grandmother.
Yeah. That, you know, I can relate. I joke that, you know, when you only have technologists and people who follow logic and binary, that's why when we're looking at access management, the next idea is, oh, I know, let's have longer, more complicated passwords. Right? Humans don't work like that.
This is a common problem throughout the security industry, where a lot of times security people are seen as the people who say no. And we really need to be the people who say yes. And part of the problem is that we haven't really designed systems with people in mind.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've talked about in the past, and it's something hopefully that the industry is working towards, that we need to enable businesses and people to get their job done without being a hindrance. And adding forced forms of authentication before you can log in is obviously a hindrance.
This is something that we could talk about forever, and I totally think that we should have another Cyber Wednesday on this. As you know, again, as this is my personal area of passion, is humanizing security. But we're coming up on time, and I want to make sure that we hit sort of the last and arguably most important question, which is, how can these two communities, the hacker security research community and the policy communities, continue to work together more in the future? And what should each community know about the other before or during those interactions?
So I think one thing is terminology. You brought it up earlier, that you constantly hacker with security researcher, which I encourage you to continue to do so. And I encourage you because a lot of people see the word hacker and they think criminal instantly. It's like the first thing that jumps in their mind, ooh, these are bad people. Whereas actual hackers tend to use the word as a badge of honor, as somebody who likes to explore and technology and find problems and get them fixed, as opposed to somebody who just tries to break into stuff. So language is definitely a big issue. Inside the Beltway, inside here at DC, cyber, right? Everything's cyber. Outside of DC, hackers, we don't like that word so much. We try to stay away from it. It's not something we're a big fan of. So language is a big issue, and it can cause problems when we're communicating with each other. So I try to stay away from words that can be ambiguous and have different meanings to different people. So
I'm on a mission, by the way. I know a lot of people have taken up this sword, but also, again, the linguist in me has this like totally digital safety. Digital safety is a good one. Instead of cybersecurity.
Yeah. There's a lot of there's enough words in the English language where we don't have to use words. We should be able to find some. Yes, that we don't have to use words that have different meanings to different people.
Well, so maybe this will be my contribution to this question. Is recognize that there are certain realities to each group's situations that you're not going to change. So unfortunately, now I have to completely contradict both of the points that you just made. So, I mean, originally, I'll put it this way. Back in 2015, when I was writing one of my first reports for Congress, I refused to use the word cybersecurity. I replaced it with information security, and I just wouldn't let it. I wouldn't let it go. That's no longer the case. I will put it out there that, in my personal opinion, the cybersecurity nomenclature battle has been lost. No. It is cybersecurity. It will be cybersecurity. It's now being shortened to cyber. People are going to say it, and my advice, if you would like to come work in the policy world or interact with the policy world, is get used to it. I don't think it's going anywhere. But to make a more macro point off of that, and tying into the point I made before about, sometimes I think we have folks from the technical community who come with us and they're like, this is such an obvious solution, we have to do it, why aren't you doing it? And it's not a satisfying answer to turn around and say, there are laws, there are regulations, or there are reasons why we can't pass a law or pass a regulation for these things. And so I think understanding those realities and those barriers on each side and why they exist and those kinds of things, those are really important. So the empathy piece that Bo was mentioning.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that what the two sides can learn from each other is the same thing, which is, I think that security researchers should look at Congress and realize that when Congress is mucking around in your space, they're doing it with the best of intentions. And I think Congress should turn around and look at the security research community and say, with a few outliers. And I think the same is true for the security research community, is you should look out and say, look, as my boss was saying on the video, right, they're looking for things that are broken so that they can be fixed. They're not looking for things that are broken so that they can do anything particularly malicious with it or anything other than say, hey, this is broken, let's get it fixed. And I think that misconception of Congress is out to get us or security researchers are hackers that are doing evil things is, if there's one thing that I could get both sides to learn about the other, that would be it. And then that ties back into building trust, which is, I think that there's more than one, analogy about trust of this is a leap of faith. You're not gonna just get there by in order to build trust, you have to be willing to be the person to step out there and say, I'm taking a risk. And I think that we are trying on the Hill to do that with the security research community and say, look, we want to get your input. We trust that you all aren't going to burn us by doing something that gets our bosses' names in the headlines tied to hackers. And so, yeah. Well, exactly. But in the headlines, that's probably the word that would be used, right? So that's what we're trying to do. And I think that in terms of connecting with Congress, being willing to take that leap of faith and say that there are members, there are staff that are willing to work with you is very important.
Yeah, one of the things that I've seen among all the teammates, including some of those who aren't here in the policy world, is curiosity, a desire to learn more, learn how things work in a different world, in a different space, willingness to put up with some of our character defects or some of the features that got us where we are that may not work in other contexts, and to sit down and listen and engage. And that's one of the things that make hackers too, right? Is most of us started out being a puzzler. We just wanted to figure out how everything works. We were taking apart our Rubik's Cube or the radio or whatever when we were very, very young. And then by figuring those things out, we gained a deeper knowledge and understanding that we used to be able to manipulate those things in surprising and interesting ways that had security consequences to them. Just recently, yesterday, we got word that there was a bill introduced in the Senate, actually, which in the press release that this is the Warner bill, which was just introduced. In the press release, they credited their consultation with the Atlantic Council, with myself and Josh, with some of the folks at Harvard, like Jonathan Zittrain, and like Bruce Schneier, with consulting with them to make a great bill. And looking at that, looking at the press surrounding it, I mean, I've heard very, very few security researchers or hackers complain. I've heard lots of positive stories about this particular piece of legislation. And I think that that's a testament to what can happen when the two sides work together. I don't know whether that bill is going to get passed. I hope a lot of the elements in it are maintained and upheld, not just in that bill, but also in a lot of the other postures towards cybersecurity in the federal government. But I think it's a great existence proof that working together we can be safer sooner.
I think that's a great wrap. We're going to open it up for questions. You can, for those of us in the room, you can obviously raise your hand. You can also tweet at me, and for all of you online, you can tweet at Ariel at work, ARIELAT work. Oh yes, and use the hashtag ACCyber. I've got TweetDeck up with like 4 panels right now. So hopefully I'll catch you all. Yes, sir.
What were the top 3 things you saw from a technical perspective that made you think, wow, we may need to...
I'll repeat the question. Oh, there you go.
What were the top 3 things that you saw technically that you said, wow, we may need to either make a new law or modify an existing law to address this situation?
I don't know if I saw anything that would require a new or modified law. There were a lot of things that made me stand up and say, wow, this is more important than I thought it was. The voting machine hacking village was one of those examples. I was surprised at how much interest there was in that. The car hacking village did a lot of stuff that I wasn't expecting. So I don't know if any of those things require new laws or modifications to existing laws, but they definitely were interesting and exciting for me to see.
Well, one of the things that we've been talking about for a while in the security research community and on the Hill and other places is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which makes security research illegal in a lot of cases if you're doing something like reverse engineering. Just recently, as of a couple of years ago, there was an exception for security research on cars, on medical devices, and on voting computers.
The DMC is very odd. You have to apply to the Library of Congress to get an exemption for certain devices, and that exemption only lasts for a short amount of time, 3 years. So the current exemption is for voting machines, which is thankfully, that's one of the reasons why we were able to do the voting machine village at DEF CON this year.
Yep. Yeah, and like I said, for medical devices and cars, but that one had a delay on it, which
right, they delayed it until after the last election.
Right. And there's been some conversation about how do we loosen up laws like DMCA so that people doing security research working in good faith don't accidentally get caught in the same law used to stop movie pirators.
There's also been talk about potentially loosening up, if you will, the CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was written in the 80s. And there's a large number of sections in the CFAA that can be very narrowly applied today, which is outside the intent of the original authors. So there are a lot of laws that need to be changed and updated. I don't know if there's anything specific at DEF CON this year that I saw that would prompt me to say, oh, now we need to change this other thing. But yes, I don't know if anybody else.
Let's go over here, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Is the hacker
Can you wait for the microphone?
1 second. Yep. There we go.
Thank you. Is the hacker community like Hackers Without Borders, or do hackers notice which passports other hackers are carrying?
I would say it's more like Hackers Without Borders. The hacker community has very much traditionally been a meritocracy, and it's more about what you know than where you're from or you know who you are, and that's starting to become more and more of the case as we get into the future. I mean, you talked about elitism, and I won't go down that rabbit hole, but that's becoming less and less of an issue. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say as compared with a lot of other places, it's more like Hackers Without Borders, and I like that analogy. There actually is a couple of organizations that do Hackers Without Borders type work, go to other countries and things like that. But
there are hacker conferences all over the world.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not just a U.S.-centric thing. So.
But I also think that there's actually a lot of diversity of background, perspective, race, gender identity, a lot of other things in the hacker community that are I haven't found anywhere else I've gone, particularly in education. I mean, I know lots of people who have dropped out of high school who are some of the best hackers, security researchers I know, who work for Fortune 100 companies in very prominent roles. There's almost, not quite, but almost an inverse relationship between education and success within the hacker community. Yeah, formal education. Good clarification. But I think that diversity is part of our strength. And I think that preserving and enhancing and improving that is really good. And to your point, I mean, anybody at DEF CON can walk up to anybody else and have a very high fidelity conversation, which is part of the reason why I think none of the hackers were afraid to walk up to Congress people and say, hey, what are you thinking on this? Like, what are you doing? Why did you do this move? Like, why does this matter? So I think it's great to have that, and I think that we want to enhance and preserve that as we grow.
And to that point, I mean, you can sort of see that play out in the policy of, going back to Wassenaar and intrusion software controls, which the biggest policy concern with that was putting export controls in the way of vulnerability research defeats security in the United States, abroad, in the entire ecosystem. And the recognition that it's not just a United States issue, security research is one of the primary factors that drove the policy change to say, look, we need to re-examine this issue and make sure that vulnerability reporting is not something you're going to need a license to do.
I know, speaking also for myself, as someone who came from a very different background in a different outside place, the openness of the hacker community. I start my talk this way. I've cold called people in special operations, no problem. I was more terrified of going into my first B-Sides at B-Sides DC than of calling special operations. But when I got there, and shout out to Wendy, Wendy Knox Everett, who is here today, and also the reason that I'm in this community at all. When I got there with her, everyone was so nice. And shortly after this event last year, she encouraged me to reach out to Jeff Moss, also known as the Dark Tangent, who is the founder of DEF CON, to ask him actually some of these very same questions. And he and I had a 2-hour conversation about it, just because I asked. It's really great. So we have a question from Twitter. I find, this is from Curious Reptile, I find morale and trust is low among many hackers with respect to policy due to the CFAA. Any thoughts on CFAA reform? And can you remind us what CFAA stands for?
Computer Fraud and Abuse Act.
Thank
I think
you.
it was passed in '86, if I'm not mistaken.
Something like that, yeah.
Somewhere in the 80s.
86.
And it hasn't really been updated much since then. It basically makes a crime of just about everything. And it has been used as a sledgehammer by some attorney generals to prosecute what I consider to be low-level or non-crimes. It came to the forefront a lot in the case against, and I'm going to blank on his name, and I should. Weave and Aaron
Schwartz.
Aaron Schwartz, thank you.
Yeah.
And you can Google both of those names. They're very tragic cases. Have there been, I'm sorry, and the question was, have there been any efforts to modify the CFAA?
Any thoughts on reform? And
I would love to reform it. I don't know if there are any current efforts underway.
Can our Hill folks speak to that now?
So I can speak to what the Department of Justice is doing, which I was on a panel with an attorney from the Department of Justice while I was at DEF CON, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, so I hope I get it all right. But Department of Justice has recently, very recently, as in last week, released new model vulnerability disclosure guidelines for federal agencies that they can use that basically try and clarify what kind of research would be acceptable or that agencies, departments and agencies could put out and say, here's something that you can do that you don't have to worry. The Department of Justice has worked with it's basically a pre-cooked memorandum of understanding that we're not going to come after you for doing this research on the federal side. On the, in terms of in the world writ large, I mean, one of the stats, two things. One positive step that Justice has taken is to require review to try and make sure that all of the 94 different DA's offices have similar policies for prosecuting CFAA, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act cases. And Justice itself conducted a review of cases that have been brought under the CFAA And based on their review and the feedback that they got from security researchers in the last 10 years, Weave is the case where Justice is like, we got that wrong. That was pretty purely security research, and probably should not have been prosecuted as it was. And beyond that, though, there is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act does also allow for a civil right, and so companies can say we can get statutory damages because a security researcher has violated CFAA. That is obviously not contained in the scope of what Justice is reviewing, but I think it is important to realize that Department of Justice is taking steps to try and address some of the ambiguity that I think there is in the security research community about CFAA.
Well, and I think the other thing that's important there too is not just looking at DOJ or any of that, but when you look at the federal agencies who have jurisdiction over some of these sectors, like cars and medical devices in particular, both of those agencies have actually come out with full-throated support of coordinated disclosure, and they've been very clear in communicating to the companies within their sector. We expect you to have a coordinated disclosure program, and we expect you to work constructively with researchers. So, I think that's also something very important to keep in mind, is that there's many parts of the federal government, not necessarily related directly to CFAA reform, that's still going after trying to make coordinated disclosure the norm.
And security researchers have been involved in making these efforts happen. I know IM Cavalry has done a lot of work with the FDA and with the
FDA,
Department.
I've had several meetings on the Hill myself,
Yeah.
and DOJ and whatnot.
The Department of Defense. So in that sense, there is a lot of moving forward from the security research side. What about for not necessarily security research, but just noodling or modifying? 6 months or so ago, there was a story about John Deere, having to go back to the manufacturer to make a change when it could have been hacked.
Yeah, right. I think you're talking about right to repair.
Right to repair, yeah.
It's a very interesting question that I think is a.
We'd need a longer panel.
We would need a much longer panel.
Put that on the list.
We need a bigger boat. But the essential tension there is, do you want to be able to allow people to repair very complex machinery where there's a high degree of likelihood that they might get something wrong? Or do you want to lock people out so that they have to go through only authorized repair centers and essentially establish some kind of a monopoly or certification for repairing whatever? And it's a thorny issue. You've got two really important issues that are in some tension there, at least as they're defined right now. I think we could overcome, but I think it would take getting the right people in the room with the right attitude and the right background and willing to be curious, be empathetic, and to move forward together.
Yeah, there are also questions as to liability. By the way, shameless plug, these are the kinds of questions that we talk about on my podcast on the Tech Effect. Bo has been a guest. I look forward to having you all on there as well. We can just have DEF CON to DC Part 2. Yes, sir.
So I've been going to DEF CON for years now. It's good to see you guys. I couldn't go this year. And I would be interested in working in policy. I would be interested in helping. I don't want to have to quit my day job to do it unless you can pay me enough to quit my day job to do it. I didn't think so.
I'm a freelancer. Don't count on it.
There's no money in it.
Okay, but there is the honor of making the world a safer place, and that is actually what I get to do with my day job. And since I came to this from corporate education, I actually know how to translate from Technese to English. And so I'm wondering if you two can give, anybody can give me some guidance as to how I can get more involved and make the world a better place. I mean, even my license plate is white hat.
I can start with that. Start coming to more events like these. Start going to local B-Sides. B-Sides DC tickets open soon, B-Sides Nova. Check out local meetups. One of the things that's so great about the hacker community is that one of the many definitions of hacking, right, is how to make things work in ways that people might not expect, in non-traditional ways. So there are all sorts of official and unofficial ways to get involved. Again, I wasn't in this world at all 18 months ago.
We had at the mock congressional hearing we did at B-Sides Las Vegas, a couple of people asked just the right questions, and we went on a basically 30-minute conversation about how to get involved, whether you're in DC or even for folks who are not and don't plan to come to DC anytime soon. I think that was really, really instructional. One of the things that I took away was just the weight of things that can be done in a district, right? Going to talk to the district staff for your congressional representatives or for even local representatives. So much happens at the state level, and the state and the district folks are they're really seeking people who know what they're talking about in some of these issues where there's not an established body of work that they can turn to. There's not an established convening body that comes together like the American Bar Association, American Medical Association, and others. So no matter where you are, you've got somebody who represents you up here, and you can tap into them to just go and be their friend. Last year,
I hate to use a cliche, but write your congressman. Write a letter to your elected officials, or find a grassroots organization like I Am the Cavalry, or the EFF, or the Centers for Democracy and Technology, or any one of those other organizations that are already involved, and you can volunteer and help out with them.
And there are numerous opportunities to engage with the federal bureaucracy, the executive branch of government. So, you mentioned cybersecurity, education, NIST's NICE initiative, National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, has an RFI out right now that says, if you know something about cybersecurity education, we want to hear from you so that we have a better understanding of what's the lay of the land, what should NICE be focusing on as it goes forward. NTIA is another great example. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration ran a very successful multi-stakeholder process, completely open, on vulnerability disclosure. They're running one now on Internet of Things patching and awareness. Bo knows more about this than I do.
Patchability and upgradability.
Yeah, there you go. So these are open initiatives. Most of what the government is doing when it comes to putting out rules and regulations, they're looking for comments, and many of particularly the more the agencies like FDA, they have open workshops where they come to discuss the guidance that's currently being developed. And so those are wonderful opportunities to put pen to paper, to show up in person and say, I am an expert in this field. Here's what I think that you, the federal government, should be looking at.
We had another question just in front there.
I'm Mike Nelson. I work for Cloudflare, which is a company providing cloud-based protection.
You guys at Black Hat.
I was going to say, I didn't get to go because my colleagues did, and I'm very glad that this panel is happening. It's been fascinating. But I haven't heard much mention of the cloud, and I was curious whether there was a cloud hacking village or whether there was any discussion about how we can use the cloud to protect against some of the cybersecurity problems. We spend most of our life in the cloud when we're on Facebook and the like, and yet it's much more photogenic to hack into Jeeps and pacemakers and voting machines.
I don't think there was a cloud hacking village.
No.
It just seems like another technology that we use these days. What's the joke phrase you always hear? Cloud is just someone else's computer.
You only hear that in the hacking world, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is part of it.
In DC, it's going to solve all our problems.
Yeah. There were a number of talks and lots of vendors who are all there to solve all your cloud needs. Something that I have an article forthcoming on this, but looking at the language of obfuscation in the tech sector and security world, every vendor can solve all of your problems all the time for everything, just sign here, is a huge, huge problem. And I think we've seen the same with the cloud as we've seen with IoT, as we've seen with AI. You know, the use of the term AI went from below 60 in companies, like earnings statements, went from below 60 in all of FY16 to almost 200 in the first 2 quarters of FY17.
I bet you would see a similar rise with machine learning.
Yeah, yes.
Another big hot topic this year.
Yes, I think that was last year's. Big data was last year's.
Yeah, big data.
Rise of the Machines was last year's DEF CON.
IoT and cloud before that, and you know, the irony is, right, that we don't actually have AI.
Well, and I think the other thing that I would just say, because this is something that my committee is especially focused on with vehicles and medical devices and SCADA systems, energy grid systems, essentially. There are a lot of companies and other organizations who are racing to adopt the newest, greatest thing, and the things that we are still struggling to secure that are causing us the most problems, that present the biggest security risks, are the 30, 40-year-old protocols and technologies and all these other things. So I think, you know, it's been very interesting for us, and it's a particular point of focus for us of trying to say, that's great, go look at all of those future-looking technologies you want, but we still have to solve the problems from 3 decades ago.
Yeah, and we tend to have the same problems in cloud that we do everywhere else, which is we build something that's insecure and indefensible, and then we want to just, you know, put a layer of icing on the top and say it's fixed, it's all good. But the truth is we need to build more security in at the design phase, the design level, because it's impossible for an aftermarket type of solution to work in every case. You do a lot of amazing things, but it's never going to be as good or as cheap as something that's inherently built in.
I want to build on your point and then change it from cloud to IoT, because you're talking about ICS systems, or industrial control systems, that are controlling power plants and manufacturing centers that are 20, 30 years old because they're designed to have a long lifetime. But now we have IoT devices that we're building, which some are designed to have a long lifetime and some aren't, but we're not putting security in them. We're making the same mistakes we made with the ICS systems, only now they're IoT systems and in people's houses, and they don't have security in them either.
Are you on Bo's working group?
I don't think I'm on his working group, but me and him and I work close together. So.
Okay, so we have a whole bunch, and we have a couple on here. So I know you were raising your hand for a little while. In the middle here.
Thank you. My question was about what are your thoughts, your expertise, and your reaction about the hacking issue, U.S. election?
Oh, hacking the election?
Yeah. So we also have a couple of questions on Twitter about some of the results from the voting village. So maybe if you can give a couple. I don't want to get sucked into that because there's the whole political mess, and it's
a couple
just
points.
not worth it. But yeah.
The voting hacking village was pretty eye-opening. I'm kind of surprised that it was so eye-opening because it's been an issue for the last 20 years. This isn't anything new that we didn't know about before. We've known that the machines have been fairly wide open, if you will, very easy to compromise. So I'm glad to see that focus on the voting machines now. Whether or not there was any issues during the actual election, I can't speak directly to that. I don't know if anybody else wants to.
Yeah, a lot of times what we hear is, well, no one could hack that. And then it's proven that someone could. Well, no one would hack that. In this case, I think we flipped that, or a little bit flipped that. A lot of the research that's been done, if you go up to Princeton, Ed Felton's got a voting computer up there that's running Pac-Man, so you can go play Pac-Man instead of vote. We've seen them running Doom, which is a computer game from the 90s. The security research community has known for a long time that voting computers have lots of security issues with them. The threat model has usually been to just keep those things unconnected, disconnected from the internet, which makes it much, much harder. We did a panel last October on hacking the election system, hacking the electoral process. And what we found is kind of what the government has said, which is it's so spread out and it's so diffuse
that it would take a high number of resources to do anything like that. But we're starting to see indicators that certainly a lot of people are now paying attention in the public eye to some of the potential hacking attempts of some of the voting systems, some of the election systems globally. The Vote Hacking Village, I think they had like 26 or 30 devices. All of them were hacked. One of them, only one of them was actually hacked remotely though. Most of them, they had to be taken apart, something plugged in, have physical access to the device, which is some comfort, but it's small comfort.
I feel like someone would notice.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing too, I mean, elections are also very closely monitored, and people look at the results very closely, especially organizations like the Associated Press and some other organizations. So if there's widespread irregularities, something like that would be noticed. Yeah. Now at the local level, I'm not so sure if something would stick out as much, but on a national level, there are so many people that look at each election year over year over year. If there are a large number of votes that have been changed that weren't supposed to be, I have to think that somebody would notice that.
Yeah, and there are some technical steps that can be put in place in order to reduce the ability to hack them unnoticeably, to increase the amount of effort that it would take. Things like, audit trails that can be printed out and
voter verified paper audit trail, VVPAT.
That's right. Yeah.
We've got time for probably one or two more questions. Yes, sir.
And we will be here for a reception afterwards if you want to come and hit us up.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for taking questions. Blake Subject with E&E News. So this was the first Black Hat DEF CON under the Trump administration. I was just curious if you could give us a sense of how some of the activities and policies from President Trump played out there.
No impact. Other than maybe some discussions in the hallway. I don't think the activities changed at all because of who was president.
Well, there were some differences. There were some people who weren't there.
Yes.
Some people were denied visas. Some of the speakers were denied visas to come to the country. There were also some security researchers who chose to stay away. It had a chilling effect on security researchers coming in.
That goes to your Hackers Without Borders comment earlier. It is really a global community.
Yeah.
So yes.
And there were some people who ran part of the events chose to not run those events this year and to stay away, partially for fear of being turned away at the border, but also partially just out of protest against what they see as an unfair policy. So it didn't have a huge impact, but it did keep several people away.
I think other than the travel issues, I mean, it's not something that we go to DEF CON, it's like, the presidential policies are good or bad or whatever, regardless of who is or isn't president.
It was interesting to me how in general, I mean, you all experienced more of the policy discussions than I did, but even what was discussed in terms of policy, there was very little to no politics, like none, which was so refreshing. I'm going to take your question because I know you've been waiting, and then one last one from Wendy. So you first, sir.
Bobby Pestronk, just a citizen interested in this issue. There seemed to be consensus on the panel that new products coming online in the Internet of Things are simply repeating the failures that occurred in software, protective software that was written many years ago. This seems to me to be an area where policy would be very useful, and I'm surprised that it wasn't raised as one of the suggestions. And then secondarily, as a citizen, thinking about all the products that are out there for a potential purpose, what should the average person know about how secure they actually are and what to do about it?
They should listen to my podcast where we talk all about that.
Yeah, we've done a lot of programming here at the Atlanta Council on that, on public policy issues around the Internet of Things, and there is some action that can be taken by public policy to that doesn't get in the way of innovation, which is what everybody's afraid of, but that preserves confidence and trust in the markets to be able to grow in a sustainable way, and avoids any kind of a catastrophic impact that might hit GDP, national security, trust in government, and those types of things. So there's probably not enough time left on the panel to have an in-depth conversation about that, but we can send out some links or something like that with some of our work that we've done.
And Wendy.
Hi, so I brought one of my badges with me. This is a Key in the Crypto Village contest that Bo mentioned, and I heard that Bo might also have some electronic badges. For people who attend, the badges are a really big part of hacking at the conference. I think it reflects on the DIY fiddle around with things, and I was wondering if you could possibly show some of the badges and talk about how badge life sort of informs hacker culture at the conferences for us.
Boy, I'm glad you asked. I did bring a bunch of badges. I went overboard this year in getting badges. The badges, especially the electronic badges, are things that are made to be hacked. They're little puzzles and Easter eggs and cool, fun things. And if you're sticking around, you can see some of these. But
so while you get those out, can I give a little bit of history?
Yeah.
So DEF CON at the beginning had regular paper badges like everybody else, but of course, hackers being hackers, they went to Kinko's and copied them. And so DEF CON, it was started to become a constant battle between the organizers of the conference and the people attempting to get in for free until finally.
Oh, that's where it came from.
That's how it originally started. So yeah, they tried metal badges and then different colors, and people would spray paint them and whatnot. So now it has evolved into custom circuit boards, and there are usually contests associated with each badge where you can hack the badge and find hidden messages in the code or whatnot. So with that, this year, now a lot of different organizations at the conferences create their own badges for the various villages or whatnot, or they just create a badge to have a badge and either give it away or sell it to their friends.
Yeah, so the whole badge life thing was a big thing this year. This is the official badge. This is for contests, or this is for the people running the event. Call it Goon or DEF CON staff. This is for speakers. But then there were also some custom badges. So as Wendy mentioned, some of the villages, some of the contests had specific badges. This is another one from the Crypto and Privacy Village, which is pretty cool. It's actually got a radio antenna on it. You can pick up signals. It's got a knob you can dial in. There was a badge for the biohacking village. So this is the biohacking badge, which this is actually a live yeast culture and agar, so you can grow your own yeast and use it in bread or in beer. Word has it that one of these fell off of somebody's badge, and it was a vial full of white powder, and so there was a response that had to be taken to that. Then there are other unaffiliated badges, and there were actually some where there were people running around selling them, just announcing it on Twitter. So what might be like a food truck, here's where we're going to be, people rush to it. They were doing that with badge sales, and this one is called the Binder badge, and it's like Hunter S. Thompson crossed with Binder from Futurama, and it's got some cool stuff on it. You can actually play a botnet game where you try and hack other people's badge with Bluetooth, which was a lot of fun, except I wasn't very good, so I kept getting hacked. Then this is maybe one of the legendary badges. It's the Mr. Robot badge, which I got in a raffle, but this one got shut down pretty quickly. The creators of Mr. Robot were not at all involved in the badge creation, and so there was a copyright and trademark issue. But
so just to provide some comparison with those are the DEF CON badges. The B-Sides Las Vegas badge was a little poker. Do you have yours?
I don't have it.
Okay, I brought the two that I have because I had a feeling this might come up. Unfortunately, I left them in the other room, but I'll go grab them. The B-Sides Las Vegas badge was a poker chip with the B-Sides Las Vegas tiki on it, and it was on a lay because it was Hawaii themed, tiki themed. Yeah. And then the black hat badge was a piece of paper, and it had a little ribbon on it that said press for me.
Yeah, the black hat badge is pretty standard that you get at every conference. So.
Speaking of Mr. Robot, I did, as part of Black Hat, get to hang out with Christian Slater. So that was pretty neat.
Yeah, so
perks of being press, I guess.
Yeah.
$2,500 for a black hat,
yep.
And you just get a paper badge, and it was like 200 and something for DEF CON, and you got some really cool badges, and usually when it's an electronic badge, it's really fun.
Yeah. So, I think that is a wrap. Thank you all so much for coming, and I know that we'll all be available after the panel for a bit. You can find us on Twitter, thanks much. Thank you, guys. It was great.
Thank you.